Hi, good morning. My name is Giacomo. I'm a production engineer at Facebook in Dublin, Ireland, and I work in the synthetic network monitoring team. We do active network monitoring, meaning that we don't monitor the network by asking the network how it is, how its status is, but we send traffic and we inject synthetic traffic to understand if the network is capable of moving that traffic. Today I'm going to talk about a tool that we had. We had the idea in our team, and that tool, we had like initial traction, proof of concept. In early stage, everybody was on board, but eventually we kind of, we scaled too fast. So we moved too fast, we didn't do kind of things that we know or know we should do for the success of a project, and this is mostly like a journey. It's our story. I try to make this story generic enough so that it's kind of more usable by everybody. I don't think you're going to hear anything out of the ordinary here, but like there is no formal process for this kind of post-mortem for a project. We somehow got in a better shape. We are still not out of the woods yet, but I hope you find this interesting. So the agenda for today, we're talking about like what I mean by scaling and why we failed at it, and how we went back to the customer, and what as a production engineers we did for system design and software principle so that we got the project back on track. So scaling. Internally, we have this framework in which we divide the projects into phases. We think about it like in a startup phase, in which you get the idea, you get a prototype, you scale it up to a proof of concept, and you validate whatever idea is your project try to solve or implement. And then during the scaling phase, you pretty much make it into production. And scaling here means like scaling the project on multiple aspects. It can be scaling in accepting more traffic or handling more situations, can be scaling like we did, going 2,000 servers, can be scaling in sense of scaling the project so that you have more people, staff to work on it. And then once you reach the optimize phase, is pretty much you are in production, you keep like iterating on it and making it better and iterating. And that's where we never reached. We never went out of the scaling process. For various reasons. So mostly we went back and we talked to our customers. I use customers here as a kind of broad term. To resolve this complex situation, we went to our users. So customers can be real customers. In our case, we're a user of our tool. We write tools for our teams at Facebook, so our customers were engineers like us. But like every project is different in that regard. And we kind of went into this loop, which was really helpful to us. The first thing that we did was actually trying to feel the pain and share the pain that the customers had. Writing that was maybe specific to us, but like we write a tool for other people to use. So we started like trying to shadow their own code, see how they were using our tool, how they were not using our tool, how they were working around our tools, and attend their post-mortems to see like why we weren't able to provide them help during like incidents and stuff like that. And then we started like even when planning features, we have the customer in a closed loop, because eventually like that helped focusing on what is important for them. And same when testing or reviewing any kind of feature that we were implementing. That taught us to communicate early and a lot. This is especially true like if you have different time zones or different locations. So part of our customers were in different locations or in different time zone. Communicating early and setting expectation has been key, and that's one of the things that we didn't really do, and we failed to do in the early stage on the project, and looking back is one of the bigger mistakes. Expectations are key. You need to communicate early. You need to communicate a lot. Yeah. So we are production engineers. We kind of think of ourselves as software engineers, and our feature is going to production. We try to go after the easy target and learn in the meanwhile. So this is a kind of complex problem that we had, and like many things in computer, we divide it in smaller problems and try to do divide and conquer. So starting from the system design, we went and back to the customers, we decided what the key metrics were for the success of the project. Because eventually we realized that we didn't have a clear metric to track for our customers. And we also decided what were the service metrics that were really important to us. And again, this is really well known. You should have a metric. You cannot really improve it if you don't measure it. We all know that, but we didn't do that properly, so it's worth knocking it out. The metrics, they don't have to be orthogonal. They can be the same. Of course, customer metrics are really important for us as well, but maybe not vice versa. But again, we decided what we needed to focus on. For example, being a monitoring tool for the network, two metrics that we decided with our customers were what percentage of the network are we covering? Are we covering all of it, part of it? What is the goal? And how good were we at detecting events? So how many events we successfully detect in time? How many events we detected that weren't actually real events? So these metrics were key for the customers to understand if our project was working, our tool was working successfully. And once we had the metrics, we started we didn't do that, but we should have started pushing those metrics and create a timeline from early on in the life of the project, so in the proof of concept phase. We didn't have clear metrics, so we didn't, of course, measure them. But when we started doing that, the situation really improved. Once we had the metrics, we created dashboards, because even before having alarms and stuff like that in the early stage. And one thing we realized is that it's critical the dashboard have just enough information, but not too much. So we divided the dashboards between what is important for our customer and what is important for us. That doesn't mean that the customer can look at our dashboard, but it means that we don't want to overwhelm the customer with details of the internal status of our tool, which they are not interested in. So a customer dashboard really helped us to let people understand when our tool was doing what it was supposed to do. We also realized that we weren't tracking our dependencies correctly. And dependencies here is really a broad term again. For us, it was other systems and services that we were calling to do our job. Most of these that we had the biggest problem were our dependencies, meaning that we were responsible also for the dependencies, which is funny. But yes, we started tracking response time and failure rates. Failures is easy, because if a dependency fails, it's easy to spot. But if it slowly go bad over time, it's a different stuff. Or still a dependency is we realized we had a process that we were shelling out. We kind of thought yeah, it's a process that we shell out. What's the problem with that? Well, it had a deadlock, and it kind of deadlocked everything because it never returned it. So that's a dependency. One process that we found was really important was going through all our dependencies and understanding what we could drop, what we could not drop, and how could we survive the failure of one dependency, and what graceful model we could do if one of these dependency failed. And another really big win we had from deployments. So we didn't have continuous deployment. I know it's kind of everybody has continuous deployment this day, but we didn't. And that led us to a kind of situation in which we had huge deployments. The deployment were checklist based. There was lots of steps. lots of manual looking at dashboard, lots of manual work, and that was painful, and people didn't want to do deployments, which led to more changes to be deployed every time we deployed, which led to us not trusting the deployment process, which led us to a bunch of other problems. So, for example, one time we were over Christmas. Nobody wanted to deploy over Christmas because, well, most of the team was actually spending quality time with their family and friends, and we didn't want to disrupt that. So we came back in January. We had such a huge pack of commits to deploy that they were failed. It took us like well over a month to bisect all the deployments. So like the takeaway here that we had is like even if you are in early stage and you have to ship more features, cover more parts, onboard more traffic, there's always more to do. Investing early on in a well-oiled machinery to deploy is key, because then you trust your deployment. You think about it not a checklist, but as like, what are my metrics? It forces you to have like proper metrics so that you can write proper health checks, automatic health checks, and just make you more comfortable in pushing. And this is really key if you have like some incident and you need to push an emergent deployment, because you already have the machinery in place and you don't have to skip it, which is great. And lastly, we also had this is maybe more specific to our use case, but I think it's reusable. So we are monitoring the network, and most of the time the network kind of works. Well, it works. And so we were trying to detect some events, and we realized that we were waiting for the events to validate if our tools were capable of seeing those events. So what we did was creating this end-to-end tester that inject failures into the network. You can see it like some kind of chaos engineering, but not really. And these created events for us to detect. And so multiple times per day, we have these events created, and we can validate if our tool is successful in seeing it. So we don't have to wait for the big event, but we have many of them every day. And that helped us because in this way, we can see if a new feature actually improves our metric before having to wait even a week for the events to happen. And the same process we applied for writing the software. We write and operate the software, so for us it was twicefold. We went back like to how we create software, and we decided like to do proper software architecture and design meetings, and that led to write proper design documents which were discussed. And one key takeaway there was like to wait a little bit before starting implementing when we decided on new ideas, because that gives us the time to digest and discuss the changes. Also, it's easy for us to change a production system, kind of easy. We don't work like in industry like space or like putting stuff at the bottom of the ocean, which it's more tricky to change. But still, like if you get the design correctly, everything is going to be better. We don't aim to perfection, to do things perfectly, but still there is a balance. And I think we were more on the wrong side of this balance by moving too fast. Unit tests, well, we all have tests. Our problem was we have too many. We had like a crazy high standards for coverage, like we were aiming for 100% coverage. That actually wasn't good, because to reach that goal, we intermixed the test and the code too much. We didn't have like clear interfaces. We refactored that, and to have like clear interfaces so that we can change the features without having to change the tests. That were really great. Again, many talks about this stuff. It's nothing new, but we didn't do it. When we started doing it, things got better. We also forced us to have like a clear test plan with the coverage going up and not down. That didn't have to go up, can be the same, so that at least new code was covered. That helped us. Because eventually, like, we realized every line is a liability, and if we can go away with doing stuff with less code, that's actually better. And this is true for tests. We had a lot of copy-paste in the tests because, well, there are tests, not really code, right? So yeah, also focusing like on the problem at hand, because like sometimes us as engineers, we try to solve the generic problem all the time. This is something that we do often, and goes in solving problems that are not yours, having like a software that is ready to handle all the possible manifestation of a problem. Instead, like if you do focus on the problem, it's actually better because it leads to less code and code that is easier to maintain eventually. And lastly, similar to new features, we did the same for architecture changes. Every time we had to do an architecture change, considering that we were looking in the custom and notice thing, and we discussed it internally. And another thing is like every time we focus on a change, we kind of ask ourselves how it's going to change the key metrics that we agreed on. And if it doesn't, it's okay. Maybe it's like a tech debt kind of removal, or it's like a change that you need to do to support a feature down the line. But still, like if it's not the case, why are we doing that? What are the metrics that are going to be improved by this change, and how it's going to make our customers' life better? So to recap to the project phases, we kind of said like, okay, we're going to back in the startup phase and do this properly. And what we kind of agreed on was like at the end of the startup phase, your metrics are defined. They're stored somewhere. Dashboards are ready. Pretty much everything. You may not have alarm. You may not cover. You may not do all the things that you're supposed to do, or serving all the traffic, or doing serving all the users. That's okay. It's still a proof of concept after all. It's just enough to validate your idea. And then when you scale it up, your components and dependencies are in check. You review how many dependencies you have. Since you have metrics and you have clear metrics, you can set up like alarms on the stuff that we know we do for production systems. And then at that point, you are in production. You keep scaling up, and you keep it iterating on the software. Eventually, we realized that like setting expectation and knowing at which point you are, it's really important for the team, for the customer, so that everybody is kind of on the same page on what we do and what we didn't do. So for example, for us, like again, on coverage, we never say to them that we weren't covering all the network. So most of the customers thought we were covering all aspects of the network. That was like a clear problem, of course, and created some friction. So communicating early has been key. And know when it's the time to move forward. Don't wait too much. Don't do that too soon. That was another key takeaway, because eventually you want to not to rush it. That was our problem pretty much. And that's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you.